snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys! So I am here today to do a book review, and the book that I'm going to be reviewing is one that very much surprised me, and it is called The Honours, and it's by Tim Clare. I was sent this one very kindly by Jean because she didn't want to read it and she had been sent it, so I'm very happy to have it. And I read this with Brittany, Eleanor and Jackie, whose channels I will link below. I was not expecting this to be what it was. I thought that this was going to be a historical fiction, and it wasn't, because it started out kind of like historical fiction and then did a complete shift into a fantastical book halfway through. So I'll warn you before you go into this, it is actually fantastical. This is the actual cover if you were wondering underneath. Like, very, very pretty, I'm sure you'll agree. So what is this story about? It follows a young character who is called Delphine, and Delphine has been away at the beginning of this book at boarding school, and so she's on the train home and she's really, really looking forward to seeing her family, particularly her father, who she's always had a really good relationship with. So she's very much looking forward to that, and she's on the train back. But when she gets back, her mother says, you can't see your father because he has been, you know, a bit deranged recently. He's been a bit crazy and we don't want you to upset him. And she doesn't really take it seriously, but when they get back home, they find out that their father has actually burned everything in the house pretty much, so they need to get away from him. He's obviously gone rather crazy and they're not entirely sure why, so they decide that they're going to go to this big manor house where people are treated for conditions like her father, and hopefully that will help him. And so she spends the summer there with her mother, her father, and a few of the other characters that they meet when they're there. Along the way, Delphine is the only child most of the time. She doesn't really have any friends to play with. She doesn't really have anything to do at this big old house. So she is quite an inquisitive child. She has a very, very vivid imagination. So she kind of concocts all these stories in her head. She's a bit of an unreliable narrator because when she is talking, you don't always know if everything she's saying is happening or if she's just imagining these crazy things, which sometimes she is and sometimes she's not. So she's a very interesting and captivating main character to read about, and I instantly liked her as a character because she has this imagination that is very fun, it is very whimsical, and it keeps you excited. But most of the time she's there on her own, she doesn't really have anything to do, so she decides she's going to explore this big old house and explore the grounds, and when she is exploring she keeps seeing these strange creature-like forms and things that are sort of in the distance, and she decides that something is going on. Something fishy is happening. She also starts overhearing some conversations which lead her to believe that people might be plotting against her or against her family, and so she gets very, very suspicious quite quickly, and she jumps to a lot of conclusions, and this leads her down an investigative path where she meets other characters who sort of run the grounds, and also other characters who she trusts with her opinions, and then they let her down. I was very, very into this book in the first half. I thought the first half was fun and I liked her as a character, and I was wondering where it was going. I didn't really know what exactly we were trying to accomplish with this book because it seemed like a fun historical fiction with a great imaginative character as the sort of forefront and centre, but I wasn't sure what we were doing with her, where she was going, whether it was just going to be this psychological thing that she'd been imagining, all these crazy things happening. That's what I thought this was going to be. As it turns out, as I said, this completely shifts. It really surprised me and it took a completely fantastical turn. And I think you guys should know about that because I would have liked to know that going in. Otherwise it throws you off, and that's what it did to me. It threw me off for a large section of the book. So the first half I enjoyed, the second half I started to be like, what is going on? Is this real? Is this fantastical? I don't really know. I'm getting a bit confused and irritated. There were some definite fantastical elements, and by the end of the book you are convinced that they are fantastical, not just imaginary. This book could really do with a sequel, and I don't think there's one planned at the moment, but there might be, I don't know. From what I could see, it didn't look like there was, but I think it could do with one, because the ending of this is very, very ambiguous, and it leaves a lot up to the imagination, which I guess ties in with our main character who has a vivid imagination, but I would have liked to know conclusively what was going to happen next, especially since it is such a big cliffhanger that we leave this story on. I do think the plot is exciting and it's definitely a quick read. I think I read this in 2 days, so it does not take very long to get through, and it's a really interesting one to discuss if, like me and the others I read it with, you didn't expect it to turn into fantasy halfway through. Then it's definitely good for discussion, but I will say it's a weird book as a whole, and when you take it as a complete thing, it feels very disjointed, the first half to the second half, and the second half does feel more rushed in my opinion. It didn't feel as developed as I like. Obviously I read a lot of fantasy, so maybe I'm a little bit pickier than some of the others, because I know that some of the others really loved this, like absolutely loved the book, whereas I didn't love it. I just thought it was like a fun read and had some interesting elements and some interesting moments, but then kind of let itself down a bit in the second half. Overall, I ended up giving this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I do think it's a good book, I do think it's an interesting book, and it definitely surprised and intrigued me, but I don't think it was done to the level I would have liked it to be in order to justify the switch in style from historical fiction to fantastical historical fiction, which just felt jarring to me. It's an interesting book. I'd love to hear what you guys think if you have read it, because it is such a weird one, and it definitely wasn't what I was expecting. But yeah, let me know in the comments if you've read this and what you thought. And if you haven't read it, let me know if you're planning on reading it. Thank you all for watching. I will see you all again soon in another video. Bye!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.